we are talking about a practical approach to prioritize PMT, VPM substances. And the main reason, I'm the head of the, I told you before, I'm the head of the division of chemical safety. We have 300 persons working on all chemical regulations and environmental assessment. And the key principle is, and it's my mantra which I always repeat, is we have limited resources. You don't get any more capacities in the future, very likely. Sadly, you don't get any more capacities. So you need to prioritize what you are doing. And so this is an approach which I will talk about now. And at the end of my talk, as a spoiler, I will present you 5 substances we have prioritized. And the aim of the talk is to show you how we did this in a transparent and rational way. So, prioritization is a necessary process in our daily regulatory work because there are over 22,000 registered substances with countless users, Mark already told that, under reach. Prioritization needs to be transparent and must provide a clear and documented process for addressing chemical hazard and risk. It also enables regulatory authorities to target the most hazardous substances with the highest risk. Here is the results of a large research project which has been funded by our ministry. The project started in 2019 and the results were published last year in 4 separate reports which are available on the UBA website. And thanks goes to Hans-Peter and Sarah, which were both at that time for NGI Oslo, Norway. So, step 1 is the identification and classification of an intrinsic hazard. Under REACH, the hazard data requirements for registered substances are triggered by the tonnage and the type of uses, and 3 types of information are requested: physical and chemical properties, human health properties, and environmental properties. And obviously, since we are an environmental agency, we focus on that. There's self-classification by manufacturer, the importer, downstream users, which considers whether a substance or mixture displays properties that lead to a hazard classification. And the hazard classification is always a starting point for exposure assessment and risk assessment, and also for hazard communication. And as my speakers before me, stressed out, our focus here is to protect drinking water. Drinking water, we have a very good reason for this. Drinking water is an immensely important resource which will be more scarce in the future. So, we focus here on PMT and VPVM substances. We have, as you already heard from Mike, we have new hazard classes implemented in the CLP with a long transition period. But all this is an essential step to the protection of Europe's drinking water resources. So REACH provides data, CLP provides criteria. The CLP hazard classes are PMT, the new, which are interesting for us here now, is PMT and VPVM. Self-classification by manufacturer, importer, downstream user with a long transition period. That's what I told you already. Harmonized classification of PMT and VPVM substances by member states and ECHA is already scheduled and expected soon. That's what we heard. So, here we come to the results of the project. We have found 13,405 unique chemical structures in the REACH registration database. So we were able to conduct a PMT VPVM assessment, and 31 of these substances did not meet the new PMT and the VPVM hazard classes on the CLP. That's the green part. Missing data for 64%. No concluding PMT VPVM substance assessment was possible, either due to missing test data or due to ambiguous assessment. And only roughly 2% fulfill the new CLP criteria for PMT VPVM substances. That not sounds very much, but from a management point of view and regulatory point of view, 259 substances can be very much. And so we needed to look further for more prioritization. To make it very clean, the hazard classification is based on cutoff criteria, and thus the hazardous properties themselves are not the basis of prioritization here. And prioritization is always based on external factors like emissions or exposure comparable to risk assessments. Prioritization is also based on socio-economical factors like if a PMT, VPM substance is not detectable or not removable. So, this is the most complicated slide I will show you today. Now there's another one which is even more confusing. We have 4 prioritization criteria. The first, we use a traffic light system to visualize available data and knowledge gaps. And the knowledge gaps here, you can see this is the white cells. And build a prioritization framework for PMT, VPM substances in the REACH registration database. And what are the criteria for prioritization? First, the exposure level. That's oops, I'm not really sure. This is the first is the REACH emission likelihood. The likelihood that emissions occur is based on registered volumes under REACH and the environmental release category and sector of use. And the second one is exposure level. Exposure level is based on a large literature review of 55 monitoring studies from 2000 to 2019 on drinking water source media, riverbank, filtrate, groundwater, raw water, and drinking water. We have also a criteria that there's an analytical or monitoring gap, and we found that we analyzed that based on a representative survey of 27 water laboratories in Germany, and included other chemicals which are not analyzed because there's no method available to analyze them or no request to monitor them. And the last criteria here is the remediation gap. Remediation gap technology and investment costs required to remove a chemical from drinking water resources like ozonation and activated carbon filter. So that's the logic behind the prioritization, and I promised you there's one more even confusing slide here, and you don't need to understand this in the whole. It's just an illustration what we did, and that we analyzed the substances according to the emission likelihood, exposure level, analytical monitoring gap, and remediation gap. And of the 29 of the 259 PMT VPM substances in the REACH regulation, we have at the moment, and the highest overall priority for immediate regulatory action is there for identified with this table, and we will update this in a few years. But as a result, regarding all these criteria here, we selected 5 substances: melamine, benzotriazole, 1,4-dioxane, PFHXA, and TFA. And one reason was that they are ubiquitous, detected in high concentrations. So the last step is a prioritization of regulatory measures based on their effectiveness. So we now know which substances should be addressed for regulation, and therefore, in step 3, it comes to find an appropriate regulatory measure. The German competent authority uses the regulatory management option analysis, RMOA, which is a voluntary measure which is used to involve any stakeholders into the decision-making process for an appropriate regulation. The following regulatory options are considered: CLP regulation, harmonized hazard classification and labeling, and REACH regulation and identification of a substance of very high concern, or solarization regime and inclusion in Annex 14 of REACH, and restriction of certain uses. There are also management options outside REACH and CLP. For instance, the Industrial Emissions Directive, use of less hazardous substances and reduced releases of hazardous substances, the Waste Framework Directive, of course the POP regulation when it comes to persistence, the Stockholm Convention on Persistent Organic Pollutants, the RUSH restricting the use of certain hazardous substances in electrical and electronic equipment, food contact materials, regulation on materials and articles intended to come into contact with food and peeling, and of course also voluntary emission reduction measures taken by the industry. This is not a regulatory measurement, but a measurement taken by the industry. So it could be a proactive approach for demonstrating safe use. What are the past and current regulatory activities for PMT/VPBM substances? These are the substances we worked on and are currently working on. The first regulatory measure for a PMT/VPBM substance was a restriction proposal for the use of PFHXA in textiles and firefighting foams. And for other substances like melamine, TFA, and benzotriazole, we are currently working on proposals for a harmonized classification as PMT/VPBM substances. And for 1,4-dioxane, we are currently planning to prepare a proposal to restrict 1,4-dioxane levels in detergents. So, what are the conclusions? The implementation of the PMT/VPBM criteria into CPL and into REACH regulation is an essential step to the protection of our drinking water and the drinking water resources. And I think we cannot overestimate the importance to keep these resources safe and clean in the future. Certainly we have climate change and we will not have more water in the future available. However, this is a missing data point. 64% of REACH registered substances have missing or insufficient test data for a conclusive PMT/VPBM classification. We will continue to support REACH registrants to identify PMT/VPBM substances and to close data gaps and non-compliance. Now today, only 1.9% of 3,405 substances fulfill the new CLP criteria for the PMT/VPBM substances. This all has been published on our website. You can find it there, it's in English. And the prioritization framework indicates that those PMT/VPBM substances that are in need for immediate action by REACH and REACH registrants and legislators, and this is also published. So, as a head of the division, I do not do the actual work, as you might have guessed. So my huge thanks goes to the people here which are certainly more experts than I am. And so we also acknowledge that was too fast. We also acknowledge the funding of the project by our Ministry for the Environment. Thank you.
ZeroPM. Zero pollution of persistent and mobile substances. This project has received funding from the European Union's Horizon 2020 Research and Innovation Programme under grant agreement number 101036756.